the Africans and everybody else.
We cut our power and they build a city and it all equalises out.
Sorry, say that?
We cut our power and they build a city.
Oh, right, yeah, well that might happen actually, yes. Turn off all the lights in Britain, they might appreciate that, and then they build a city. I'm all for ambition, but I'm also for realism, and I think it's quite utopian to believe that Britain can in any way show the way for other countries. I think it's enormously patronising and condescending, but nevertheless that's what I've come to expect from Greenpeace. I'll tell you why I believe that. Here's Ed Miliband. Barclays, of course, has nothing to do with him. He's the Secretary of State for the Department of Energy and Climate Change. He's taken over a Britain which has a government which has spent how much, would you guess, on carbon capture and storage around coal-fired or gas-fired plants. You know, when you have coal-fired or gas-fired plants, it's possible to capture the CO2, or they believe it to be possible, and then store it underground or in the sea, under the sea. How much has Britain spent, the government, on researching that rather important technology?
Nothing.
Not nothing.
How much?
Very little. Well, here's the figures. It's spent 6.4 million in the past 5 years until Miliband took over. The price of half a house in Mayfair is really what it's spent on that. This is the country that's going to lead the world in fixing climate change. Now, this is not a discussion for me about whether the government should pick winners or do the R&D, or whether private sector should do the R&D. All I'm saying is that we face a diminished sense of leadership in Britain, a diminished sense of ambition, and fooling ourselves that we can set an example to the Chinese or the Indians is a great mistake. If you look at China, and I'm there for a second time later this year, you'll find that they, along with the French actually, are leading the world in applying CCS. Here we've got a suburb of Beijing, they've got a conventional power station there. They are capturing just about 1% of the carbon dioxide coming out of that, and they're putting it in carbonated drinks. They're not storing it. They're adding to New Labour's obesity problem in China. So it's a terrible thing. But you know, they are really leading the way. And it's not just me saying this. If you read the New York Times, if there is such a thing as clean coal, and there isn't yet, but there is some progress towards it, making coal cleaner, it's China, not the US, that is making the progress there. And it's not just the New York Times saying that. If you look for Jeffrey Immelt, I-M-M-E-L-T, he's the head of General Electric, he wrote a piece in the Financial Times, possibly the Washington Post as well, saying that America had already lost a lot of its leadership technologically in energy to China. Now, don't misunderstand me, I'm no fan of the Chinese regime. In fact, whether they even let me in there later in September, I'm not entirely certain because I've been so critical of them. But I am a fan of the Chinese, and I am a fan of the way that they are running towards the light, and they believe that human beings can broadly achieve a whole lot of stuff. And I think we've lost that in the West, and especially we've lost it in Britain. As I say, it's not just me or Jeff Immelt, it's also the International Energy Agency, based in Paris, sees China lead the way in developing new, cleaner coal technologies. And they make the point that the 4,000 megawatt Wuhan power plant, that's 4 gigawatts, sets a new global benchmark for the efficiency of coal-fired power plants. Now, obviously, China's very backward in lots of ways, especially the interior regions and so on. And we shouldn't be starry-eyed about, you know, what they're achieving. Many coal-fired plants are extremely polluting in China. Many people die in the Chinese nuclear industry, in mining coal and so on. Not the nuclear industry, I'll come back to that. But nevertheless, if you look at the nuclear industry in China, you'll find that there is one and it's moving forward. It's collaborating with the South Africans. It's installing this little sort of Lego Diddy nuclear power station, courtesy of Westinghouse, now owned by Toshiba, in fact. So it's Japanese technology being installed in China. They're opening a new machine in 2013. You can see the little tweaky lorries there. It's a 4th generation machine based on what is called passive safety, so that instead of what happened at 3 Mile Island, when 34 alarms went off simultaneously and everybody ran around like a blue-ass fly, things switch themselves off automatically through the force of gravity when things go wrong there. I'm going to turn quite a bit to nuclear power later in the talk. So let's drill down a little bit and see just the extent of the problem with British energy firms. Now this is called R&D intensity, where you take R&D as a percentage of your sales revenues. It's not that difficult, even I can follow it. Proportions is about the most I can do in maths nowadays. You'll see that in terms of the expenditures, you know, even BP and Shell, and certainly the National Grid, and Scottish Power, I fear, David, and people who should know better, are spending less than 1% of their revenues, way less actually, £1 in every 1,000 or less, £2 in every 1,000, £3 in every £1,000 they get in, they are spending in the laboratory. So is it any surprise that we are so far behind the curve in dealing with carbon dioxide emissions, in making energy cheaper, in assuring its reliability, and in bringing it to what used to be called the third world? When you go to what used to be called the third world, it's not only China but also the Indians who are making a lot of progress. Now I was very sceptical about wind, and I remain very sceptical in Britain about wind being any solution to our energy problems anytime soon. I think the targets are ridiculous. The closure of Vestas says it all, and the government's infatuation with wind really is a cover-up for the fact that Tony Blair decided not to build any nuclear power stations in this country in 2003. However, when you do wind at scale, and I think you can see from this plant that Suzlon, the Indian manufacturer, which is a multinational and one of the top 10 turbine producers in the world, actually has a lot going for it. This is the guy who founded it. He couldn't get his textile mill to work in India, so in order to assure himself some electricity, he built some turbines, and the rest is history. Here they are working on it in Minnesota, in fact. They employ Middle Eastern people as well as Americans in Minnesota. And the striking thing is that they're still making those kinds of blades by hand. So Boeing 777s are made on an assembly line, you may not know, where the planes move along at 4 centimeters a minute. By contrast with turbines at the moment, you're finishing it by hand. You and I know that if that was subjected to Ford-style assembly line techniques, the blades would be made at a higher level of precision, the power output and reliability of the turbines would be much greater, the turbines would not shear off, their blades would not shear off, and you'd be really moving properly into the 21st century. Now, generally speaking, there's a way to go, therefore, in wind.
So just on the question of wind, are people happy with this air fan blowing?
Yes.
Keep it in place, yeah?
Good. Well, one of the interesting things which people seem unable to realise about nuclear power is also true of wind power, which is that even with the inhibitions that the West has about technological development today, there is progress in terms of the power output that wind has been able to achieve. Right now, the biggest turbine made by GE is about 7 megawatts, it's 7,000 watts. This is a mass installation of turbines in 2006 in Texas, which is really moving up to 1 gigawatt, which is pretty good. This, by contrast, is what our green friends used to want, and David Cameron asked for planning permission to get, which is the sort of one that he did was going to generate about 40 watts. In other words, it would just about power 1 light bulb. And as we know, there was a hamster down in the basement with a rubber band transmission mechanism making the whole thing happen. So micro-generation of energy, certainly with wind, very likely most of the time with solar, except for water heating, is really no solution to the energy supply problems that we have. In the book, in chapter 6, which is all about renewables, we coined a new phrase for renewables, astronomicals. All right.